You're listening to an IOE podcast from the UCL Institute of Education, powered by UCL Minds. In 2011, Anne Phoenix, Professor of Psychosocial Studies, spoke to the IOE about her research interests, which includes motherhood, social identities, young people, radicalisation, and gender. Professor Phoenix is joined by Catherine Walker, who at the time was a PhD candidate and now a research associate at the Sustainable Consumption Institute. The pair discuss inequalities, education, and life paths.
I was wondering if you could describe to me what your main research interests are and how those have developed across your career.
Yes. Well, I came here to work in 1983 on a project on mothers under 20. And that really fitted with the work I'd been doing on my PhD and also my undergraduate degree, which was on mother-infant interaction, actually both of those. So this was a slight shift in that I was moving to work on mothers under 20. And it was really formative for me, that work at Thomas Coram with Peter Moss and Julia Brannan. The reason that it was formative was because it very quickly became evident that mothers under 20 did well with their children. They had a lot of difficulties. They were living in poverty on the whole, but that they did a very good job in the circumstances. But both the academic literature and social commentators treated them as if they were necessarily problematic. And that really spurred on my thinking, together with the research team of Peter Moss and Julia Brannan, because it made me understand that this was not just simply factual, the way they were treated, but that it was about social construction. So they were socially constructed as problematic because they didn't fit notions of what normative and normal parenting and childhood should be like, and hence emotive headings about them, such as children having children. And having thought about the notion of social construction, I became very interested in language and the ways in which people talk about and think about different categories of people. But I was also then very interested in the way in which certain samples are racialized. In fact, from that research, I coined a term which was normalized absence stroke pathologized presence, which sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but actually it did what I really wanted it to do, which was to think about the ways in which, when, for example, people who are already constructed as normal, as normative, as the ordinary or the ideal are being studied, then it means that normal processes are at play, and you omit people who are already constructed as problematic. The example I would give is when developmental psychologists, and I see myself as being social and developmental psychologist, as well as having a great interest in sociology. When developmental psychologists studied mothers under 20, it wasn't unusual for whole studies to be given over to black mothers under 20. But when they were studying the processes of normal development, then black mothers tended to be omitted. And what that served to do was to construct and continue constructing white middle-class mothers as the norm and to exclude others from that norm. So normalized absence, pathologized presence seemed to me to really fit. And therefore, lots of other interests stemmed from that study in racialization and so on. Okay.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about racialization and how you see that as entwined or intersecting with gender, and perhaps even a little bit about your personal interests in the intersectionality.
Well, intersectionality is one of the key themes of my work. And it is so because very early on I realized, for example, thinking about motherhood, that mothers are not simply positioned on gender. It's not just that they're women, but they're also positioned in other social categories, so that they're racialized. And the example I gave just now about the ways in which the studies of mothers under 20 are sometimes just of black mothers, even though they're not the great majority of mothers under 20 at all. And this is particularly US literature, because fewer studies have been done in the UK. So racialisation and gender intersect, and they can't be taken apart. But equally, mothers under 20 are predominantly from the working classes. So you have race, class and gender. And so once the term intersectionality was coined by Kimberlé Crenshaw in 1989, I thought that it really helped us to see why it was important to keep on analysing not just one of race, class or gender, but to think about racialisation as socially constructed and to see it as intersecting always with gender, social class and other social categories, which didn't mean that you always had to be analysing several categories at once, but recognise that whichever category you're looking at, like gender, it's always decentered by its intersection with other social categories. And I've very much liked the way that the term racialisation has been taken into the social sciences. It was coined originally by the Martinican French psychoanalyst Frantz Fanon, and it's about the way in which race is not natural, but is a social construction. So things are racialised, people are racialised, situations are racialised, rather than naturally occurring. And so that seemed to me to be really important, to think of intersectionality as a heuristic, a way of understanding meanings in the world, a reminder, a shorthand reminder that we need to think about intersections and the decentering of categories. And why was I interested personally? Well, because as a black woman, I think positionality makes a difference to one's interests and how one sees the world. Now, the very first thing that I would say about intersectionality is that it de-essentializes, which sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but it reminds us that simply knowing that somebody fits into a category, like I've said, I'm a black woman, doesn't tell you anything about what my views are. But it perhaps does say, that because of certain experiences, that one will have to come to views about certain things. And so I was interested in thinking about, what does racialisation look like in society, and being really sensible to its impact. And so that's why, partly, I'm interested in intersectionality and think it offers a great deal of promise for research.
And within an educational context, how do you see racialisation and gender, and again the intersectionality between the two, being played out in young people's educational trajectories?
For quite a long while, statistics have been collected on gender and gendered differences in education. And we now have racialised differences recorded, and ethnicised ones as well, different ethnic groups. We know how they perform at various stages in school and so on. And we have at least proxies for social class. And it becomes clear when there are analyses of how children are faring, what their attainment is, that we have to think about race, class and gender at the very least as intersecting. Sometimes people refer to them as the big three, and dislike the fact actually that other categories are sometimes downplayed, but nonetheless they're important. And we see that, for example, white girls and black girls do differently, black girls and black boys do differently in school, and that also, if you think about social class, that the black middle classes certainly do better than the black working classes, as you might expect, knowing anything about social class, but that there's a racialised difference as well, so that they do not do as well as you might expect in comparison with the white middle classes. And then thinking about ethnicisation, then British-born Chinese students do better than everybody else in education, and there's also gender differences. So one has to ask questions. The reason that it's a useful heuristic is you can then ask why that is. Why does it happen? And why is it reproduced over time? And David Gilbourne, who's a professor here at the Institute, actually has done some very interesting work suggesting that there are concerted practices that reproduce racialisation and gendered intersections and so on. in ways that maintain the same differences between students.
I've got one last question, which from my point of view is, well, I'd be really interested to hear your response to this. Obviously, you're one of my PhD supervisors, and I'd really like to know, what do you see as the main benefits and challenges of supervising PhD students?
Well, I think that from my point of view, one of the main benefits is actually watching somebody move from feeling not so confident generally about the area that they've taken on and feeling somewhat intimidated by the academic process, by whether or not they're sufficiently intellectual, and sometimes by their supervisors, to moving through a process where they can't really believe that they ever thought their supervisors knew anything in the first place. And sometimes coming through that to being a peer of the supervisor, to really being able intellectually to engage with them, to being the person who knows the most about the subject that they've taken on, and flying intellectually and perhaps moving into academia, but if not, being fitted for the work that they choose to do. I think that's one of the most exciting things, seeing that process. But along the way, it's enormously beneficial to have enthusiastic and excellent PhD students who read and therefore help to keep me as a supervisor up on particular areas that I might not read so much on, who guide my reading as well as my guiding theirs, because they come across things that I don't necessarily come across, and who engage in debate. The delight is to have PhD students who will be the future of social science in this country and will help the IOE to maintain its excellence.
And thank you for answering all my questions. It's been really interesting for me.
Thanks so much for downloading and listening to this IOE podcast. You can find more audio stories from the IOE on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, and on your favourite podcasting platform.
UCL Minds brings together the knowledge, insights and ideas of our community through a wide range of events and activities that are open to everyone.